Thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you everybody to be here. I guess I don't tell you anything new if I say that we are really in a mess. And by that I mean the multiple global crises that we are in. It's a social crisis, an economic crisis, a political crisis, and above all, an ecological crisis. We have already created the fastest species extinction in the history of our planet. We are losing 1% of our fertile land each year. Climate change has set us on a path where, according to new studies, large parts of the Middle East and North Africa will become uninhabitable, while 1.5 billion people, depending on the water from the Himalaya glaciers, might lose their fresh water resources within a couple of decades. And all this happens on a planet where 8 men possess more than the poorer half of the world's population. Now I would like to talk about the role of technology in creating this mess and the changes that we need in our conception of technology to get out of it. When it comes to technological development, I often hear the words, "what can be done will be done sooner or later." Many people think that technological development follows a path directed by quasi-natural laws that head into one and only one direction called progress, which is to use more technology, more complex technology, more expensive technology, more powerful technology. Now, if this were true, if everything that is technologically feasible will be done one day, humankind and the planet are finished. The detonation of thousands of nuclear warheads and the unleashing of artificial killer creatures manufactured by synthetic biology would wipe out life on Earth sooner or later. However, this narrative of quasi-automatic, unstoppable, monodirectional development of technology belongs to the realm of mythology. Which technology is developed and which is not? Which is used and which is not? All of this is based on decisions made by people. Decisions that could look quite different. Let's take the automobile system, which was mentioned earlier. It is perfectly feasible to organize efficient mobility in cities without cars. The technologies for this have existed for more than 100 years. But it is not done, and there are reasons for this. It is also perfectly doable to feed the whole world with organic peasant agriculture. And much better than today, to save 30% of greenhouse gas emissions by that and dramatically reduce fresh water use. The technologies for this have existed also for a long time, but it is not done, and there are also reasons for this. It is also easily doable to communicate over large distances without buying every year or every second year a new pocket computer that is consuming huge amounts of resources. The reasons why this is not done are the same as in the other two examples. Now, the forces that decide which technologies are developed and implemented are not rooted in technology itself, in a mysterious drive within technology to progress. But they are rooted in the way our society functions. The global system of which we are parts has been called by different names. For example, the modern world system, in world system analysis, or in more vague terms, modernity. And I call it the mega machine. Now, the mega machine is a metaphor, and it is coined by Louis Mumford, an American historian who has written 50 years ago a very interesting book called The Myth of the Machine. This historical system, it's not only an economic system, it's a political system, a military system, an ideological system, has evolved and emerged 500 years ago in Europe. It has spread over the whole planet very violently. For about 100 years, it's now encompassing the whole planet. And it's based on 2 core principles. The first is the the principle of endless accumulation of capital, or simply put, to make money of money, and doing so over and over again by an endless circle of profit and reinvestment. Number two is the hunger for territorial expansion and control by the militarized state, which is an institution that has developed in a co-evolutionary manner together with the institutions of capital accumulation. Usually we hear that they are the markets and they're the states, they are opponents. No, they are twins, they belong together historically. Now, it is hardly surprising if I tell you that the most important technological choices that have been made in the past centuries and that have helped to create the mess we are in were shaped by these two forces, endless accumulation of capital and state control. Let's take again the example of the automobile system. If people would have been asked 100 years ago if they would like to spend hours each day in traffic jams, to keep their children from playing in the streets because it is too dangerous, to suffer from acute hearing loss because of permanent traffic noise, to die later of a lung disease, and to have a planet devastated by climate change, or if they would like to move around quickly in emission-free public transport systems, as Chris showed out they are possible, that go to and fro every minute, what would they have chosen 100 years ago? Well, the choice was made for them, and it was made by certain people in the industries and the state. In the US, for example, companies like General Motors and Standard Oil bought up fairly developed public transportation systems in cities like Los Angeles, New York, or Chicago in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, only to do what? To decommission and destroy them, to build instead on the former railway tracks and the streetcar tracks, highways on which GM cars were driving with Standard Oil fuel. Now, do these reasons for this development lie in technology itself? Of course not. Have people yearned for that? No. The reason that people from Mumbai to Mexico City, from Paris to Cape Town, are trapped in the nightmare of that irrational system of individual motorcar traffic is very simple. When your economic system is based on the necessity to sell more and more stuff to people in order to keep accumulating capital, then it's a problem when certain needs, like transport, are easily met. Once an efficient public transport system is in place, you cannot sell more stuff anymore, apart from renewing infrastructure once in a while. So you have to come up with something new. For example, selling each and every citizen his own power engine, so he can consume more fuel, more metals, and more stuff. Later, when everyone had a car, they invented the system of planned obsolescence, which means that people are encouraged by a brainwashing system called public relations to buy less and less durable cars for more and more money, more and more often. Now, I will give you another example for this. I know that for some people this might be a sensitive issue and an emotional issue even, so I guess it might be a little controversial what I'm saying now. I'm talking about the mobile communication technologies and more generally about what I call boundless digitalization. It shows how the powers of capital accumulation and state control converge to shape decisions on technology. When I was small, almost everyone had a telephone, and they used them all life long. There was no reason to change them. While that is good for citizens, it is bad for the industry, of course, because the market was dead. So they came up with touch-tone telephones, then with wireless telephones, then with mobile telephones, and then with smartphones, which are becoming more and more powerful and demanding and are consuming more and more resources. Not only for the phones, but for the transmitters and all the computing nodes. Today, almost everyone has several phones, much more expensive phones, and what is most important, he gets or she gets a new phone every couple of years. All this development did not start because telephone customers in the 1980s were lamenting about their Stone Age phones and screaming to God Almighty to get them out of this analog hell. but simply because companies needed to find ways to profitably reinvest the money they have once accumulated. They have succeeded in transforming a simple need of human beings to communicate into an endlessly growing industry, urging people to throw away their devices in ever shorter intervals and to replace them with new ones. The coup of all this is that users retrospectively think they have been following their own deep wishes, while they were just serving the wheelworks of the great machine. Now, I'm not saying that smartphones aren't smart. They're great toys. And for some people, they are more than toys. For example, for many people in Africa who do not have fixed line networks and who can now talk to their friends and relatives and also to their kids who have fled to Europe, maybe. But for all the positive things that you can say about this technology, the problem is that the huge dark sides of it are systematically pushed aside or ignored in the public debates. For example, the extreme environmental destructions through mining in order to get the metals and the rare earths used in these devices, or the wars all over the world fought for these resources, or the huge piles of junk on the other side of the chain. And additionally, as you all know, this technology is not only used by consumers but also by states. For example, to set up surveilling measures of which totalitarian rulers in the 20th century could not have dreamt of. Your position in space, your contacts, emails, telephone calls, messages, shopping habits, and if needed, the live sound of your built-in microphone and the image of your built-in video camera, all this allows for an almost complete surveillance of almost every person on Earth. And since the Snowden revelation, we know that states do use these possibilities extensively and without any public control, while the private IT companies, although they deny it, are helping them. Whatever restrictions were still in place, they are removed with every new terror attack. The marvelous thing about all this is that citizens buy the technologies that surveil them voluntarily with their own money while enjoying the feeling that they have gained more freedom. You cannot imagine a more perfect convergence of the interests of capital accumulation and state control. As Julian Assange has pointed out rightfully, IT companies and intelligence agencies have created a turnkey state, ready for totalitarian and even fascist use. Already under Erdogan in Turkey and al-Sisi in Egypt, IT technology and social media such as Facebook were extremely useful for the crackdown on dissidents and the following mass incarcerations. We could go on for a while with this type of effects. Digital technologies are, for example, massively used by employers for surveillance and enforced exploitation at the workforce, something which is hardly ever talked about. There's also growing scientific evidence for massive health risk due to the overdoses of digital media, ranging from cognitive disorders among children to tissue damages caused by pulsed microwave radiation, including cancer. It's not only the industry that is denying or playing down these risks, but also many users who do not want to face these inconvenient truths. Whoever raises concerns, be it just citizens or scientists or doctors, is often labeled as an enemy of technology, of progress, and even of civilization itself. There's quite a remarkable and effective propaganda machine around all this. Now, politicians and representatives of the IT business keep on telling us that we are just at the beginning of the digital revolution, not joining in for Industry 4.0, as it is called in Germany, the Internet of Things, driverless cars and so on means, so they say, missing the future and being left behind in global competition. There it is again, the narrative of an unstoppable, monodirectional development called progress. According to the industry's plans, autonomous cars will use a new 5G mobile communication technology, transmitting for each car 50 gigabytes of data per hour, which is about what an average internet user is transmitting per month now. For this purpose, the whole country and the whole continent must be equipped with a completely new, extremely resource and energy-intensive infrastructure of transmitters and computing nodes. There's absolutely no public debate about the enormous environmental hazards and possible health impacts of all this, or about the costs. When you compare it, for example, the costs and relate it to 800 million people on the planet starving today, so there are better ways to spend money. The most absurd phenomenon, however, is that one simple question is never asked. What for? What sense does all this make? Because there's a much simpler, cheaper, and environmentally sound alternative, which is to go for a user-friendly public transportation system instead of the outdated and irrational individual motorcar traffic. But this is not even mentioned. I think the example shows that all of this is not about meeting needs, but about keeping the machine of accumulation running, a principle that will finally run the whole planet into the ground if we do not stop it before. If you are taking all this into account, I think it becomes evident that with the boundless digitalization promoted by governments and industries, and again, I'm not talking about whether to use digital tools or not, I'm talking about boundless digitalization, we risk some of the most precious values of life, namely our freedom, a sound environment, and our health. While on the other side, we are getting hardly more than a few gimmicks. Think about it. Is watching 4K movies on a screen of the size of your palm or standing with a driverless car in a traffic jam really worth all the destructive drawbacks that I mentioned? Again, digital technologies have created brilliant inventions. But if someone offers you nice, shiny glass beads for all your land and belongings, the question is not if the glass beads are beautiful. Sure they are. The question is what you give away on the other side and what relation there is between giving and taking. But this weighing up is not happening. We are all staring at the glass beads screaming, how nice, how wonderful, while they are taking away our land, our health, and our freedom. Now, while the mega machine is running the planet into the ground, it also provides the technological means to divert people from this unpleasant reality. In his science fiction novel, The Futurological Congress, the Polish author Stanislaw Lem described a world in which people are trapped in a perfect pseudo-reality created by chemical drugs in the air, in the water, and everywhere. Whereas in reality, they lived in a post-apocalyptic landscape of ruins. When the protagonist takes a counter-drug, the delusion is stripped away. Where he saw posh people in luxurious, shiny elevators a minute ago, he now sees human wrecks pulling themselves up with their naked hands on rotten cables. The digital replacements of reality today have a similar function. The more our world is paved with screens, the more reality is faded out. Virtual reality headsets, you all know them, are quite symbolic of that. In the industry, the complete loss of reality is called immersion. You become completely part of the artificial world that the company has created for you. If you think this through, it is again a perfect win-win situation for big business and the authoritarian state. Citizens are turned into consumers who voluntarily buy the technologies that keep them from looking at the situation and starting to change it. Well, now for some figures of Silicon Valley, however, this is not enough. Ray Kurzweil, for example, the head of the development department of Google, has been dreaming for decades of getting rid of human beings as physical creatures and turning them into networks of data highways. This transhumanism, as it is called, is very widespread among the developers of artificial intelligence. And by the way, I think artificial intelligence is a gross misnomer, because intelligence demands understanding, and all that computers can do is computing, not understanding. Many of these people, and unsurprisingly, almost of them are men, are waiting yearningly for the so-called singularity, which is the moment when the computing powers of machines will transcend, as they imagine it, the thinking capabilities of human beings, making bodily creatures redundant. In this vision, the business interests of Silicon Valley converge with a radical mechanist ideology that leads us to the very roots of the mega machine. The idea that humans, animals, plants, and the whole universe are nothing but machines. Famously, already the French philosopher René Descartes claimed in the 17th century that animals could be easily copied by reverse engineering once you have understood how they are constructed. And this line of thought became mainstream in modern science, although it has been significantly challenged by many scientists from the beginning. The yearning for the moment when human beings as bodily and emotional creatures can be finally discarded is symptomatic of a technocratic world of men who are so deeply alienated from their inner world that they cannot discern thought, feeling, perception from computing, which is the only thing that machines can do. It is the endpoint of the submission of human beings under the logics of the machine, of the blind mechanics of endless capital accumulation. The digitalized human only exists as a set of data, and consequently all that makes up life, spontaneity, emotional experience and creativity have vanished. Well, of course, this is not what Google is saying, quite the contrary, but it is what happens if you follow their ideas. Now the question is, do we want to entrust our future to people with visions of that kind? Do we want to feed them with our data, see the world through their Google glasses, and move around in cars that are steered by their algorithms? Or are we going to free ourselves from the matrix they have created in order to regain reality, our bodies and our minds? To free ourselves from the matrix of disempowering, delusional and dehumanizing technologies does not mean to abolish computers or to return to a romanticized pre-industrial world. Discussions about technology are often carried on along the lines between pro and contra technology. But this does not make any sense, as people have been using technology since the species of Homo sapiens emerged 200,000 years ago. So the only question is, which technology? What are desirable technologies for a humane, just and really sustainable world? How can we stop focusing on the glass beads that are presented to us and start looking at the larger context in which technology is always embedded? How can we talk and decide about technology in a rational and realistic manner? And above all, who decides? Because the myth of an unstoppable technological progress with a predetermined direction conceals the fact that beyond every development, there are decisions that can be changed. And that beyond every decision, there are real people with names, addresses, interests, and above all, with bank accounts. Searching for socially and ecologically beneficial technologies means to step out of the logics of capital accumulation and the militarized state. While IT companies, car manufacturers and the like want to design our future, with massive state subsidies by the way, trying to sell us the idea that what is good for them is inevitable for us, we should stand up and say, nothing is inevitable. Designing hope in this context means to ask, how can we make sure that needs such as transportation and communication are met in the least harmful way? And this eventually means for people in the industrialized world, how can we live better with less goods? How can we distribute wealth more equally? So what can be done concretely? Well, the transformation has two sides. It's about getting rid of the wrong things and building up alternatives at the same time. And I can just give you roughly some ideas about some important aspects of the transformation. On the defense line against destructive technologies, there are just a few things I would like to mention. New technologies must be thoroughly evaluated and assessed in a democratic process before they are implemented, especially in terms of their social and ecological impacts. The precautionary principle, which by the way is in the EU treaties but not really looked upon, must be strictly followed, which means no implementation before it is proved that they do no harm. The enormous state subsidies for harmful technologies must be stopped, and I just want to give you a few examples for these enormous subsidies. The International Energy Agency, very conservative institution, has calculated that our fossil fuel industries, oil, coal and natural gas are subsidized by whopping $500 billion each year. The huge destructions they cause in terms of climate change, for which they pay almost nothing, are not even included in that sum. The car industry is getting additional subsidies in Germany alone, about 60 billion euro each year. The high-tech strategy of the German government is spending 27 billion euros basically to subsidize the biggest polluters like Daimler, BMW, BASF and E.ON. Only 1 per mil, 1/1000th of that sum, 27 million euro, are dedicated to research on a social ecological transformation. Now, this absurd relation must be completely reversed. Facebook, Google, Microsoft, Apple and the like are profiting from massive tax evasion organized by our governments. And you all remember the Luxembourg leaks, and it's much more than that. So these companies must be fully taxed. Our governments do also nothing serious against their monopolies, which guarantee these companies enormous profits while pushing alternatives aside. We urgently need alternatives to Facebook and Google based on profit-free open source structures. Our governments, furthermore, these companies have profited enormously from technologies developed by governments. For example, by the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, which created a lot of the stuff that the internet companies are using. And they have turned it into private properties by using patents on that. There must be no patents on technologies that have publicly funded parts in it. Attempts to introduce ACTA-like rules for intellectual property rights through trade and investment deals such as CETA, TTIP, TISA or the EU-Japan trade agreement must be stopped. Now, on the other side, building alternatives, there's already a lot of hopeful initiatives going on all over the world, involving millions of people. Low tech was already mentioned, and I think, in fact, we need reasonable mixtures of low and high tech according to what fits best for social and ecological purposes in different circumstances. There is no one technology fits all solution. In the 1970s, the term adequate technology was coined, meaning that technologies should fit particular social and ecological context and needs in terms of size and complexity. Open source software and hardware are important parts of a technology that does not serve capital accumulation, but the needs of people. Much of this is developed in peer-to-peer networks. Open source should be massively supported by governments instead of proprietary solutions. Devices should be constructed in a modular and easily repairable way so we can use them for decades instead of throwing them away every couple of years. And there legislation again comes in, because legislation must ensure and must force producers to build durable modular products. It's not about us as consumers. We have no choice very often. We should develop also ways of thinking and deciding about technologies in a differentiated and multidimensional way. The question is not if feature X or Y is cool, or if a technology Z is efficient or profitable. The question is what it does with our societies and our planet. The cultural anthropologist Andrea Vetter has developed a very useful tool for this purpose, which he calls Matrix for convivial technology. And she asked which aspects of production, of use, of disposal, and of the necessary infrastructures, which impacts all this has on human relations, on nature, and on health, within 5 dimensions: relatedness, access, adaptability, biointeraction, and adequacy. Now, all of these transformations within the realm of technology are not possible without changing the larger context in which technologies are always embedded. Living better with less production and less harmful technology means leaving the crazy rat race of overproduction and overconsumption. The challenge is to get out of the destructive logics of endless capital accumulation. Now, to some this might sound too big or too bold, but in the crisis of civilization that we are in, being bold is the only way out. It is up to us if we leave the future of the planet to transhumanists, billionaires, and the surveillance state, or if we take it back into our hands. Thank you very much.